We'll make sure that that runs right up to there.
Okay.
And we'll be good.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent. Thanks.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pastor and the Recovering Heretic. I am the aforementioned recovering heretic, but our pastor has changed.
And this pastor is a recovering heretic as well. So, you just never know. You just never know who you wind up engaging with in this Q&A. Huh?
Yeah, right? That's very true. Boy, I want to delve into that history too. But the big thing is I want to take advantage of the organization you're a director of.
Yeah.
And I'm debating, do I get the heresy first or actually, did the heresy lead to what you're doing now?
I would say that one of the things that I found to be true about my own personal spiritual life is that I'm willing to ask questions. And that can be perceived as heretical. Mm-hmm. And I've ventured my way around different ways of thinking about Jesus and God and so on, and wound up back understanding God as absolute pure grace. And so I would say that one of the things that's the gift of heresies is it encourages deeper thinking about what one really believes. So that's what I think. I
think I came at the same
Did you?
Aspect. Yeah. It's even as a kid, it struck me that if your faith can't withstand questioning, do you really have faith?
Yeah.
And doesn't your faith get stronger if you start figuring out answers as opposed to just accepting what you've been told?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really a wonderful gift in my life is I was always very fascinated growing up with faith questions, religion, God, and so on. And I used to clip coupons in magazines to send for free Bible studies. And they came from all these different denominations that I had no idea what they were from. And then a Lutheran pastor was going door to door. And
I've got to hold on to that image, though.
Yeah.
I'm not used to Lutheran pastors
going door
to door.
Yeah, it was a new mission start in my hometown of Rochester, New York, in the suburb of Rochester, which was growing at that time because of Kodak. And he was going door to door about this mission start. And he was someone that loved the questions. So he invited me to church. I already had Lutheran background in my family, but it was his inquisitiveness and his willing to sit with me as we talked about really with the catechism, everything. He was really willing. And I thought, there's a place for me in this community to grow in what I believe. So that's how that came about. And I'm not afraid to, when I was a parish pastor for a long time, and I don't necessarily preach the standard operating approaches to texts. I mean, I'll read all the commentaries and so on, but I generally come up with my own view on it out of my own perspective. I had a parishioner that used to say to me, "I've never heard it preached that way, Pastor." So that may come out of the heretical background too, Dan. So I don't know.
Why do you think it is that there tends to be such a knee-jerk reaction of negativity to people like us who question so much, why are we immediately labeled heretics? Because we're questioning the dogma or the popular conception of religion or anything like that. What causes that? Why aren't more people saying, yeah, I wondered that too?
Well, it may have, I think, a similar process, and this relates to the nonprofit that I oversee too. And that is, I think human beings are built to seek equilibrium, and equilibrium may mean knowing exactly what's going to happen and continuing with the past, the way that things were done in the past. I think that it's an automatic thing that's been built into us. And to be a person who who thinks about that, notices that, and then doesn't necessarily go along with it, I think it's disruptive. It's disruptive to the status quo. I think that's one of the real challenges from COVID too. It was disruptive to the status quo, Dan. And so it's making us have to rethink everything about how we are together, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily, people are stressed. People are wondering whether or not the church is going to die. There's this catastrophic kind of thinking in some places too, instead of thinking about, and this would be where my perspective on being Lutheran is, God's in charge of all of this. And what can we look at that God's walking with us through this, and what might be the new phase of the ELCA in our case, or Christianity in general as well.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting and exhausting both at the same time.
Yeah. I focus on the exciting part.
Yeah.
Pastor Dave has said before that sometimes he wonders if I'm an avatar of chaos. Because I love disruption, but I love disruption because if you embrace the disruption, you come out on the other side with something better.
Yeah.
Because you've rethought all the old things that were maybe good at the time they were born, at their inception, but they don't work so well now. And that seems to play into also, all the studies that are showing church attendance dropping. Clearly something needs to change into how we practice religion because we are losing attendance. And disruption can help us see what that is. And I assume this is what helps us get into your nonprofit.
It's part of how, and it's interesting that this period of time is providing us with a way to think about the very things. The nonprofit that I run is 27 years old.
Wow. Okay.
And was begun by someone who wrote a number of books about how churches work. And at that time, this would have been in 1992, the book came out. People were like really interested in what he was describing. And then there was a huge grant, and there was the development of workshops working with congregations about how you could look at congregations in a way focused on mission, taking into consideration the pushback that people have. I mean, understanding that as normal.
Yeah.
It's normal. It's just how people are. Not everybody's that way. And I found, and I've been the director for 16 years now, and I found, and we work with 27 different denominations. We started off as a Lutheran organization. And then people were interested in what we were doing. So part of what we do is talk about what we've studied as being the essential pieces of what contributes towards communities of faith and leaders being aware of the disruptions and looking for God in the midst of it. And there's certain kind of elements that we focus on. One is that anxiety is normal. That's one of the, it's a bottom line. It's how God has created us. It's a sign that something either is a threat or a change, and we just need to manage it for the sake of something large. But that anxiety is built into people.
Yeah.
It's just how we are. So one of the things that I found helpful, and this is related to what you were saying earlier too, is that the church is slow. Once we become a denomination, we're less agile, and we have lots of things that get put in place that are, what I'd say, maintenance oriented. And that's not bad, but there was some things that were going on about 10 years ago that people were raising issues in the ELCA about changes that were needed, but there wasn't enough pain in the ELCA for the church to say, yeah, we need to make a change. Now, those very things that were talked about 10 years ago are in the process of being looked at. Phyllis Tickle is a church historian who's no longer alive, but she wrote a lot when she was alive. She's not writing right now.
It's kind of slowed down a little
Yes,
bit.
really has, sending things from heaven. But she used to talk about the fact that the church realizes its slowness about every 500 years. And then there's a massive what she calls a garage sale. And which I love that image, so you sell the things that you don't need anymore. And then you make choices about what you keep. And I think that in this day and age, and partly I was preaching today about technology, things are moving so fast. I'm wondering what she would say if she were alive now about how often the church is probably going to need a garage sale. I think
That's like Moore's Law. That's starting to accelerate.
Like more regular garage sales or something like that. That sort of sorting that we need to do. I think it's part of being mature spiritually is to be able to sort and let go of some things. I am naturally by disposition a hoarder. So I mean, not bad, but I'll save things like books.
I hear you on that.
Notebooks from graduate school. What a crazy thing. I still have all my notebooks from graduate school. Crazy. But what if we were able to kind of help communities of faith be able to sort regularly and look at their own functioning and have pastors look at their own functioning on a regular basis. So that's part of what we do. We have groups that support lay and ordained leaders in all these denominations and help them think about what's going on and what's worth being focused on and what should be let go of.
Now I have to ask, because my background, the denominations moved in geologic time, basically.
Oh, right.
So slow. I was raised Byzantine and Roman Catholic. And so you talk about slow to have the garage sale.
Right.
They're still putting tags on from 2,000 years ago. So what are there Catholics involved in your nonprofit as well?
Very few.
But there are some.
Yeah, very few though. It tends to be more mainline Protestant. And in the organization, because it began out of a core of what's, the ELCA is called the widest denomination in the United States.
I'm not surprised, but I didn't know that.
All our background is Northern European, and that still holds for the, but so that, it's interesting that looking at the history of any organization, you look at the history of this church, you can probably see some tendencies that continue today that were put in place years ago. Even experiences that were had that no one remembers anymore, but they're built in, I'd say it's built in the water of the organization.
They're in the bricks.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, it's really interesting, even to hear how this space got built and for what reason, all those kinds of things. It says something about the foundations. I served a church that was, for 19 years, it was my first call out of seminary. And I walked, first Sunday I was there, I walked in and there's all these, I had farmers in my congregation and also it was in a university town, so there's a lot of professors as well. So both these groups were there. It's cool.
Interesting.
Very cool.
Dichotomy there.
Very cool, yeah. But all these farmers were marvelous musicians. Marvelous musicians. They sang in parts, it was just, it's like, oh my gosh, I've come to heaven. As it turns out, that one of the founding families of this congregation back, 100 years before, were related to the Johann Sebastian Bach family.
Whoa.
So it's built in the water. I mean, these are, there's something that is part, and so this was a very musical congregation in general, not just them, but, that's just an easy illustration of that.
That is amazing. We're starting to get comments from online.
Okay, yeah, great.
And I think they dovetail with where you're heading. One, Steve was mentioning that a heretic is someone who asks questions the ruling party doesn't want to answer.
That's right.
I love that. And not answering does lead to that stagnation. I'm going to call it stagnation because I think if you're not refreshing, you are stagnant by definition. But Drew wants to know, what guidance has Christ given us to deal with the chaos and disruption you were mentioning that COVID brought in? And, do we have guidance on how we should look at that disruption from the Gospels and adapt? in the aftermath of it.
Yeah, there's more. So I think about what Jesus was doing, even what I was preaching about today. Jesus was basically saying, you disciples, you got to prepare for a new world. And this new world is a new approach to what looked like Judaism at the time.
Mhm.
Right? And so the teaching that was going on was pushing. Jesus was a heretic
He's one of
among
us.
Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pushing at the boundaries. A new age is coming in. We look at life and God in a way, and that here's this embodiment. So I think it's a great question. I think it's about being able to observe better what's going on and to be conscious of the automatics that we react to. So what would be good? I'm trying to think of a good automatic. Well, I would say some of the people that we've had contact with who are in congregations have just said, we're going to shut down most of our programs in our congregation, and we're going to wait for things to get back to normal, and then we'll go back to doing things the way we used to. So I think that I'm guessing, well, I'd love to ask Jesus what he would think about that.
Yeah.
And would he be willing to coach that pastor? Right?
Yeah.
Coach the pastor to, okay, what might be, what parable makes some sense. So I do think that Jesus was seriously an upender. That's what got him killed. And going against the ruling party and saying things that are against, and this is true anytime one is not strategic about pushing against the status quo, I think is. So one can even, it's really interesting to see. I've had people who they would say they've had denominational trauma because that's the way they would describe it, because they have raised questions about the denomination handling things the way that it is. And instead of what I was talking about forgiveness and reconciliation, were responded to with being iced or ghosted or whatever by denominational people. So it's so interesting to me. I learned a lot with watching when people are afraid. What people do is people usually kind of go into themselves and they don't like what they're hearing about, say, someone raises questions about my behavior, for example. If someone comes to me and says, you're a jerk. Can I stay in the relationship long enough to find out what might be true about what this person's telling me? I just might be a jerk. And also what it is that, what I can learn, not only about myself, but about that person, not to let them go. I'm not talking about with people that are in some ways, problematic is not the right word, but who are hurtful or violent or anything like that necessarily. But how do you listen when someone's giving you something you don't want to hear?
Yeah.
About a sermon, how to say. In the early days of my preaching, I was very pro-Mary, anti-Martha, and the Mary Martha stories. And my older women in the congregation used to yell at me every time I preached like that, because they were women who understood what it was like to be service-oriented.
Yeah. Have the
That's
Martha
as an
focus,
example.
right.
Yeah. And I changed my ways, partly because they were right.
Yeah.
They were right.
Well, yeah. I mean, part of it sticks out to me that Christ is always talking about servant leadership. From a historical record standpoint, it's almost like he invented the concept of servant leadership. And then to turn around and for people to think Mary's more important than Martha's role kind of contradicts the servant leadership motif.
It is, and partly because of one phrase that Jesus supposedly said, which is Mary has chosen the greater part, the better part. That's confusing. That would lend yourself to think, oh, well, yeah, it's better to be a someone who sits at the feet of Jesus and learns and so on. But putting that story in context with the other things that surround it, I think is really
Yeah.
important.
Well, even
That makes-
today's gospel, you know.
Yeah,
You wanna grow,
exactly.
you've got to serve. You can't.
Right, right. And how to, I think that part of, it's interesting to see in congregations when there is both service and learning all embedded in each other
Yeah.
with either lay people or even the clergy or staff too. Yeah.
I want to explore the service aspect
Okay.
more, but in a second, because part of service I have found personally is, and I'm still really bad at this part, is knowing when to serve yourself. Because if you collapse, you're no good to anybody from that point. You know, and I have trouble recognizing that. I'm surprised my wife hasn't shouted amen from the loft at this point. But I'm infamous for that. Never vacationing. And so Charlie, one of our council members, wanted to know, how can you get ministry leaders to take vacation?
I do think that needs to be modeled. That's just an easy answer right there. I think I can't ask anything of anyone else if I'm parish pastor, if I don't do it myself. I think too, building conversation about what's traditionally called self-care. But you're right. You got nothing left if you're out there just working all the time. And it's really not, theologically, it's not in line with what we say we believe. I would say, I've been reading something where someone talks about lived theology. Look at people's lives. And then you can see what they really believe, even if they say something different. So that's not a life of grace, to not take the time to work on the inner. I think that's what, and that doesn't mean vacation necessarily. That's part of it, but also it's about cultivating the things that aren't just service. So I think that's how I'd interpret Jesus. Mary's chosen the better part, that there was cultivation of herself going on in that conversation. And the balance between the two is really what I think that's about, balance, having both aspects. So for a church council, building in the examples of how important it is to be able to be refreshed, maybe even talking about it, or developing 40 days of devotional stuff or whatever else. But vacations are absolutely crucial. I've seen what happens to people who don't take vacations. I also know people have different ways of taking vacations too. And I have a spouse that plays golf. So he plays golf a couple times a week. And that to him is a little slice of vacation every week, at least when the weather's good. And so I'll say, let's go off and do something together. No. We will do that. But for him, that's his finding the place that's where the refreshment is. And I think that it's really helpful if one finds one's own refreshment, as well as with our families and with our spouses and stuff too. Like I go every year to the Cape Cod Institute, which is on Cape Cod. And partly it's great because there's educational stuff, but then it's only in the morning, and then the rest of the day you can explore Cape Cod.
Yeah.
That's me. I don't take anybody from my family with me. I just do it myself. And my husband will say, "Why are you going there? It's so boring there." I'd be interested in any response back about the church council and vacations and so on. If there's anything more that you want to say. I don't know the name of the person.
That one was Charlie in particular,
Charlie?
but we have a couple of people from council who are monitoring. So yeah, it would be interesting to hear back from you. For me, I think what's kept me sane,
Mhm.
despite not taking time off, is I do run regularly.
See, that's a great example.
And that's year round. And that's for me. And that's the one time the phone is off.
Yeah.
No one is going to bother me. I'm out, I'm running. Even if you call me midway through the run, it's still going to take me 20 minutes to get back home. So no messaging gets through.
Yeah.
And so I can focus. It's basically a running meditation as a result.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. It has so many benefits too to run.
Yeah.
Not only shutting off the stuff I was talking about in my sermon too. I take voice lessons, and I consider that to be, I have to pay for it, but integrative. It's sort of like it's time where it's just the person is focusing on me, taking care of me, and helping me be better. So I would say that would be an example that I have. But there are ways that doesn't have to be going to Italy for 2 weeks. It's the inner.
Although I wouldn't mind that.
That would be great.
I'd like to visit my relatives over there and find out.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. How to do both, I guess. I'd be interested in what the church council might wrestle with around this too.
Well, one of them just put in that they have a fairly healthy approach for most roles, but a couple of us do find it challenging to take a moment away from their service. And that, for me, I don't know if this is how it happened with them. I used to run a nonprofit as well.
Me too.
And for me, it was mission creep. I really, and I think this is very common in the nonprofit world, because you're offering a service to the community, you get so focused on how important it is for that service to continue that over time, you let the nonprofit take over more and more of your life. That's what happened to me. And I kind of wonder if that's what happens even on a council level, maybe with pastors. I don't know if in seminary you're taught how to make boundaries as a pastor.
Well, I think so. I mean, but it's, I think that it's something, that's generally part of a pastoral care curriculum, but it's when the rubber meets the road where you're having to make sense of it. And I think one of the things that our nonprofit deals with is what are the unconscious drivers that might lend oneself to handle things without keeping an eye on boundaries or what's healthy, and also what might, to be able to step back and say, oh, mission creep. I think that one of the things that parishes can do is regularly look at themselves to see in what way they're not functioning or functioning well, honestly, rather than, I know that I've been in organizations where it's a pat on the back, let's just keep going. The Healthy Congregations, we just 2 years ago began a concerted effort at looking at ourselves and having less focus on me as the executive director, because I was carrying a lot. And but it was done very deliberately now, and about the board taking more responsibilities, but being mindful of not too much either, because, a nonprofit board can be run ragged.
Oh, yeah. Well, in my case, I'm not kidding. I spent so much time there, focused purely on that nonprofit, that Google Maps started listing the nonprofit as my home address. If you looked
Boy,
it up,
that's a cautionary tale.
Very cautionary. Some people couldn't figure out how to get directions to get there because they'd look it up the address, and it would say Dan's residence, Dan's home, not the nonprofit name.
Yeah.
So
wow.
And Charlie points out, for him, stepping away can be a greater challenge when you wear multiple hats, because part of the answer then may be to find and train more hat wearers to take over some of those things.
I think that that's part of what we're trying to do too, is to pass the hats or, multiply them too. So, and I'll give you just an example in the nonprofit. I have had the task of finding board members for the board to vet,
Mhm.
to add. And I've tried to pass it off for years, finally. But, that there's a committee now. There's a committee that looks, and because their vision's bigger than mine.
Yeah.
This is just based on my network, not on, or, following my network along to be able to get to another possibility about qualities for board members. But that's just a small example. Yeah.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left.
Oh,
And,
really?
yeah.
What
because
happened?
when you get questions from the audience, I mean, this really does go fast.
Yeah.
So I apologize for that part because
No.
I never dove into your actual nonprofit. So in the few minutes that we have left, tell me more about healthy congregations,
Sure.
because that it's actually dovetailing with some work I'm doing with the Methodist Church in town. And so I'm eager to learn more because of that and self-interest here for this. But generally, what is healthy congregation? Until I met you, I didn't even know it existed. And yet here it dovetails with a lot of my day job work.
Well,
So,
yeah. Well, I want to hear about your day job too. So healthy congregations makes use of something called family systems theory, which is an approach that understands that how we interact as human beings is very much formed as a result of our experience in our families, and that we bring that into churches.
yeah.
And so things like the level of, there's 8 different ways of looking at families and also churches.
Yeah. And that was Bowen, right, who came up
Yeah,
with these
Bowen,
8 core
right.
concepts.
That's right.
Okay.
And 2 life forces, which have to do with anxiety, how much anxiety is in a family and in a church or in a community. We have tremendous anxiety in our culture today. So there's the wider view on that. But and so part of this is what we do is we have workshops that we offer to train people to use in their own congregations so that people can understand these dynamics and then concentrate. And I think this goes to vacations too. Concentrate on how they're doing. And a lot of it has to do with working on one's own family as well as one's church. So when I first started doing this work, I was parish pastor when I started doing this work, and there was all kinds of upheaval in my congregation. I came into a church and I'd followed someone who'd had an affair with the organist. So there was all kinds of lack of trust and all kinds of things going on. So I was a young pastor, had to manage a lot of that. And I just was feeling overwhelmed. So I started doing family systems work and worked on things in my own family. And that helped me manage some of the things in my church as well. So I started talking to my dad about things. I found out some history things, worked on my relationship with my siblings. And my mom died when I was young. So a piece of this was dealing with how one continues to grieve for a whole life. And then how one helps a congregation to grieve too, because that happened. Anyway, so we have workshops that we train people to go into their congregations, either their own or as a consultant, and just kind of, I'd say, share a way of looking at oneself and the congregation. We also have specialized, if people are really interested in this, we have leadership training that makes use of this. So we have couple year-long programs.
Now, is this for general leaders or specifically for clerical?
We have
Or both?
we have accountants, we have nurses, we have counselors, we have clergy, we've got a couple of people now in one of our programs that they're retired now, but they used to be administrators at OSU. And so that they're seeing this as it relates to their current experiences of doing volunteer work. And also one of the women said to me, I wish I had this when I was in my administrative job previously, because it makes some sense. And also it helps to work towards calming down all the hot spots in families too. That's a big promise I'm making, but that's been my experience.
So a core level framework
Yes.
would be essentially viewing family not just as the nuclear family,
Right.
but expanding outward into the gradually larger families
Yep.
that we have, congregation, community, nation, world,
Absolutely.
and seeing that the family dynamic concepts that Bowen came up with actually apply to
They
every
do.
one of those.
So it's, I say it's how God created us. Bowen just observed it. And he would say he was looking for a scientific way of understanding how humans interact with one another, and spent his whole life trying to figure out what were the common things that were true across cultures, and also had some connection with the natural world too, other species and so on. Mostly primates, but
They're close to us.
yeah, right. Yeah, especially the bonobos and the chimpanzees and so on. I was trying to think, there was something else I was thinking about. Anyway, does that make, so the framework is looking at the emotional dynamics, basically, that are part of being human, and then being able to observe them better. And then my own experience is I'm much less anxious and I'm more thoughtful. And I've been doing this kind of work for a long time. So,
Now,
long time.
How has this, when you've applied this to congregations, what changes have you seen? I mean, have you seen that reduction in the congregational anxiety? Viewing it as, because I know we've had what I would classify as traumas here.
Yeah, you have.
But it kind of helps, you've really seen it effectively work that way.
For example, I would say that the congregation that I served, and I was there a long time too, was decidedly less anxious when I left than when I arrived. And there's a writer named Rabbi Ed Friedman, who used to talk about how you can see your impact in ministry is what happens in the church after you leave. And if it's reasonably calmer and it handles things in a more thoughtful way. So I would say at the very least, it helps a particular person, whether they're on the church council or they're in the choir or they're a staff member, be more thoughtful in how they're handling things in their own life, and that every little bit could contribute. But there's no guarantee that like when I first started doing family work, I have a brother who's had a lot of drug and alcohol problems. And I thought, if I do this work, he's going to be all better. Well, he's better, but he's not all better. He's just himself.
Yeah.
And it was a false sense of control I think I had. I think a lot of clergy might expect that they need to be able to transform a congregation. And I think all we can do is contribute for a short period of time what we can.
So just like an individual person, they have to do the work too. It can't be you pushing the work on them.
Right,
Okay.
right. But Bowen said, even so if I'm acting a little bit more thoughtfully, that has a lot of impact. Certainly, I know it happens in my marriage. I'm a little bit more thoughtful, and I go off the deep end. As much, no. But yeah, just a little bit makes a difference. That's the quote. A little bit makes a big difference. So.
Yeah, someone just actually posted the line, transformation comes from God, but we can be the vessel.
Yes, right. No, it really is God's action. We just if we can work on our own part of the deal and not just expect that God, magically God's going to say, oh, Emlyn, you're going to be blah, blah. I've got my own work to do. Yeah.
Well, we need to wrap up.
This was fun.
And how do people get in touch if they're intrigued by healthy congregations?
We have a website.
Okay.
So it's healthycongregations.com. It's easy.
Okay.
www.healthycongregations.com. And I can hear a little bit about our mission and what we're continuing to do.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And for people around here, the nice thing is you're local too, right? You're
Right
right up in Delaware or
Right, we're in
Delaware?
Lewis Center.
Okay.
Actually, our actual physical office is located in All Shepherds Lutheran Church.
Oh, nice.
Have you ever been there?
I have not been there, but isn't it close to the Methodist Seminary as well? Isn't it up that
It's
way?
down 23. It's south,
Okay,
farther south
okay.
from, yeah. For a period of time, well, we were located at Trinity Seminary for 12 years. And then we moved to the Methodist Seminary because we were trying to branch out ecumenically. And then we got this offer from this church to partner with them. And so we're doing some interesting things there.
Nice.
So we have a space there. But now one of the effects of COVID, of course, is many people are working from home more or less. So my administrative assistant works a lot from home, for example.
Yeah.
Flexibility.
Well, I know you're doing a lot of online offerings too, as a
Yes, we
result.
do.
Okay.
We do. Yeah, and we did some before, but that's ramped up. But as I think maybe you did you hear me say earlier that actually we were surprised in one of our programs, most of the people who registered this year come in person rather than
Yeah.
online.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that before.
Yeah. So,
And that's great. It's the opposite of us. We have more online, like for the
Right.
Q&A than we do for the.
last year, that's the way it was too. And I'm not sure, we're going to study it and see what it was. And could it be that people who wanted to be online thought they couldn't come online? We don't know. We're going to look at it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I appreciate the offer to talk with y'all.
Thank you. Yeah, English doesn't have a plural
Right.
separate
right.
form. So
I
yeah.
learned that. I was pastor in Oklahoma, so I just carried it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all English speakers have some version of y'all. Because neurologically, we need the second person plural.
Yes.
And English doesn't provide it, so we improvise.
Yeah.
Yuns in Pennsylvania.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
So, anyway, but thank you. This was really nice. I'm glad.
Thanks
I'm glad
for
you
the-
agreed to do this.
Yeah, glad to talk about things that I care about. So appreciate
Excellent.
that. Appreciate the conversation partners.
Partners, yeah, and thank you. Thank you for interacting today. And we'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.